Hello, dear listeners, especially you wonderful patrons who make this possible. I have some good news to report, as you may have heard in the first episode of the Global Far Right miniseries, that I was at a bit of a crossroads in deciding whether I could afford to continue the show at all. Well, I have to say that the target I set for last month in terms of new patrons and support is looking like it's very much on track for a 1-month target. We're definitely not out of the woods yet, but on our way. Certainly buying the show some time. If I can keep up this momentum and get enough subscribers in the next couple of months, I can absolutely see Polite Conversations sticking around. So I don't want to overstate anything, but I am cautiously optimistic. Thank you so much to everyone who became a patron, to those who upped their pledge to the new premium tier, which offers a lot of exclusives and much earlier access to things. It really, really means a lot. If you are listening and not a patron yet, please do consider becoming one if you enjoy the show and would like to see it continue, because it really is still currently at risk of shutting down if we don't have enough subscribers. And another way you can support the show is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All these things help more people to find the show. This new miniseries will primarily be available on the premium tier, so if you want full access, early access, do sign up via patreon.com/nicemangoes. Now, as for the upcoming conversation in this episode, that happened on October 6th. About a week or so before the general elections in New Zealand, so we left not knowing what would happen. Byron, my guest, later sent me a voice memo after the fact, so we can hear a brief message from him about the results at the end of the episode. Also, this conversation took place just before the tragic events of October 7th and what's been unfolding ever since, so that is why you won't hear us discuss or reference those events. Anyway, it was nice to re-listen to this chat as I was editing and think about something different. I have my guests for the next couple of episodes in this mini-series in place. Hopefully some more great episodes will come your way in the next little while. I have really, really enjoyed researching and producing this mini-series so far, and I think in the current political situation, now more than ever, it's important to have a wider, more global perspective on things. Anyway, here we go. Enjoy. The conditions in the past few years have been a perfect storm for extremism,
is a terrorist attack,
hate,
the transgender community,
and conspiracy theories
pedophiles, the Satanists,
to flourish around the world.
We should unite our forces.
A measure to advance a hardline Hindu agenda.
Great Canadian truckers.
Join me as I try to learn more, one country at a time.
Marine Le Pen considerably
In another Polite Conversations miniseries, this time exploring the global far right. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my brand new miniseries on the global far right. Today I'll be talking about what's going on in New Zealand with author Byron C. Clark. He wrote the excellent book Fear. I've been reading it myself and I can't put it down. There's so much familiar in there, even though I've never been to New Zealand, but like the themes are all the same. How are you doing, Byron?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find your book?
If you're living in New Zealand, you can get it at all good bookstores. If you're in Australia, you can get it most bookstores. And if you're elsewhere in the world, the paperback's a bit harder to come by, but you should be able to get the ebook anywhere you usually buy ebooks. And if you really want the paperback, there are a few New Zealand and Australia-based retailers who will ship internationally, but you'll pay a lot for shipping. So I'd recommend getting the ebook if you're in North America or Europe or wherever.
Right. And that's called Fear again. So do check it out, everyone. And now let's get into it. How are things in New Zealand?
Well, as we record this, we're a week out from a general election. I've just been reading this morning actually about how the so-called freedom movement has been trying to get influence in Parliament through taking over existing political parties and unfortunately having a little bit of success with that. So that's kind of where things are at politically right now.
Yeah, I guess by the time I release this episode, the election will have happened. So good luck with that. And I was just reading your book, and it struck me like how familiar so many of the talking points of the far right in New Zealand are, really. It just seems like everywhere you look now, they're echoing many of the same things, right? There's like a theme of anti-immigration, anti-immigrant stuff, and the specifically anti-Muslim stuff, where they're fear-mongering about, great replacement. And now, more recently, there's the anti-trans stuff, and it's the same.
Yeah, I think they're seeing really the same talking points all over the world. Especially the English-speaking world, but even other countries. There's podcasts here where they'll get MPs from like the Netherlands and places on in English to talk about what they're doing. Yeah, it's the same sort of ideology just spreading around the world and reaching places as far-flung as New Zealand here at the bottom of the world.
Yeah. And, you've had quite the experience, it seems, with the far right over there, and they've personally stalked and harassed and come after you to quite a great degree. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So I've been a political activist in one sense or another, since going on anti-war marches when I was a teenager. But specifically, looking at the far right is something that I've focused on really since the mass shooting at a mosque here in Christchurch, where I live. And after that, I started to make video essays on YouTube, looking mostly at some of our local far right influencers, people who had YouTube channels and so forth, and that got fairly significant backlash. I was followed home from an event by a young member of a white nationalist group, and then my address where I was staying at that time was shared with others, started to get things in the letterbox, printouts from some of the Facebook pages these groups had, just to show me hey, look, we know where you live. And then probably the biggest escalation was when one of these people, a local YouTube personality called Lee Williams, who goes by the name Cross the Rubicon on YouTube, he actually turned up at my workplace, gave a fake name at the door, came in with his camera, started filming me, which some listeners might be familiar with Tommy Robinson in the UK using this tactic to intimidate his critics. And Williams was from the UK originally and a big fan of Robinson, so I think he was emulating this. That had a pretty significant impact on my life, because of course the goal of that was to try and get me to lose my job. So after that, the company I worked for started getting hate mail, started getting a lot of one-star reviews on Google and Facebook, became worried about threats of violence to the office that could affect not just me but other staff there. It was a pretty significant time. This is how I was targeted before the book was even out. I write about this in the book, just from doing YouTube and the occasional article and so forth, and being a bit of a commentator in the news. So things would escalate after I appeared on TV or radio, because the idea really was to, shut me up, stop me from speaking. So the targeting would happen after I was speaking publicly about this on YouTube or on television or wherever. Yeah.
That sounds terrifying. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, and I hope it's calmed down a lot since then.
It has calmed down a bit. 3 civil court cases later, we don't really have laws against stalking in New Zealand. It's something that, depending on how the election goes, we might get some laws, but we do have a thing called the Harmful Digital Communications Act, where you can have a civil case against somebody if their digital communications, like what they're doing online, if that can be shown to be causing you significant distress. And so I've taken a couple of civil court cases under that, and one under the Harassment Act for a more restraining order for someone. And that's something that I've done not really just for myself, but also because without doing something like this, the lesson the far right takes is that there'll be no legal consequences for doing things like turning up at someone's workplace, and that has this chilling effect where more people will be afraid to speak out. So so taking those court cases was trying to show that, hey, there will be consequences if you accost someone at their workplace or at their home or whatever.
Right, yeah. Well, I hope they get like the harshest consequences that they can, but I don't think that'll stop them. And this all started when you were just monitoring like their Facebook groups, and you tweeted out some screenshots of the kinds of things they were posting?
Yeah. So, like I said, I did the YouTube channel, but I got a much bigger following on Twitter, where I'd show people what was being posted and shared, often asking people to, report certain things, particularly on YouTube, where things will often slip through the cracks for moderation, particularly in, a small country like this. I think that YouTube isn't getting a significant pushback to New Zealand-based far-right content creators because they only have a few thousand subscribers, which globally isn't significant, but and here they can be quite significant figures with a relatively small following. So getting people to report videos, and then that would cause the people uploading these videos to then target me because they worried that their influence was at risk by me getting people to report their videos. So yeah, for some of these people, it does not take much to really set them off.
Right, and it's like the irony of them framing themselves as free speech warriors and anti-snowflake, when really they embody everything that they complain about the left doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I get annoyed at some of the sort of so-called free speech advocates we have here as well. Like people who aren't, necessarily in agreement with the far right, but will defend their free speech and then say nothing about the way the far right is using these threats of violence and intimidation to silence the speech of their critics. And I think that's a free speech issue as well. But we don't hear so much about that from our so-called free speech advocates.
Right. Like in a North American context, the IDW is basically like the epitome of that, right? Or was. They would complain about anyone criticizing people who use the N-word or, just really offensive racist things. But then when like a left-wing professor got fired for something, you'd never hear from them.
Yeah, similar situation here. There's a group called the Free Speech Union who are a sort of AstroTurf group. Has a lot of the same members as a thing called the Taxpayers Union, who are a kind of right-wing libertarian lobby group, and they did a survey of academics and put out this press release about wokeness and academics afraid to say things, but they'll do nothing, say nothing about people being targeted by the far right, as several academics in this country have for speaking at conferences and things, and then they'll get targeted and the universities will be inundated with emails telling them to fire them, and the Free Speech Union doesn't talk about that, but they talk about people being afraid to say non-woke things to their class, or and it's pretty transparent that it's not really about free speech, it's about anti-wokeness, and they're using free speech as a way to organise rather than a more principled stand. Yeah,
it's absolutely not principled, and what they choose to focus on is very telling, right? If you start looking at the patterns, it only swings one way. So there seems to be like overlaps between not just like the far right around the world, but like also a lot of the stuff that you see from centrist pundits in North America, or like even from my earlier on the internet days, the new atheist circles, like the overlaps in those talking points are really fucking scary to me, because I was like, I was in that, I was a Sam Harris fan, and I was a new atheist, and yes, people around me always used to talk about the Islamization of UK and Sharia law, and coming from Saudi Arabia myself, it didn't strike me as a dog whistle, because if you are oppressed by, if all the right-wingers in your country are Muslims and they're oppressing you, then it's going to sound good at first when other people are criticizing them. But then you look at it on a more like world stage context, and it is definitely troubling because it's all about the anti-immigrant and those brown people are barbaric kind of trope, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and any seemingly progressive stands that these people take, whether it's claiming to be supporting women's rights or whatever. I mean, it's just a cover really for a kind of xenophobia.
Yes.
And I think Muslims have really been targeted. I remember one Facebook page that I followed that's gone now, but they had a pinned post at the top. And it was a meme that said, you can't be racist against Islam because Islam isn't a race. And it was this
Yes.
kind of way of like hiding a xenophobia towards, these people from the Middle East and North Africa and parts of Asia as well. And but hiding it behind this supposed critique of religious ideology when it wasn't really about that. It was, it was about foreigners, and that's
right.
That's how they could make it more socially acceptable.
And I can't tell you how many times I heard those lines, like from, Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, who are supposed to be like these rational, sort of, they claim to be on the left, right? And they fool a lot of people. They seem to rope in a lot more people that people on the far right would not be able to. Yeah,
it appeals to a bit of a different audience, but similar talking points, yeah.
Exactly. That way the Islamophobia, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the anti-BLM, the transphobia kind of gets pushed on a group that would probably recognize it for what it is if it was coming from like Tucker Carlson or other people on the far right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it comes from these like rational men of science, it gets like a shiny new packaging. And the theme of Islam really strikes a personal chord with me because, for anyone that might be listening that hasn't listened to my content, I am an ex-Muslim that grew up in Saudi Arabia. I had a brief year or two in the new atheist scene where I was super mad at religion. And growing up in a theocracy can do that to you, but then hopefully once things start to calm down and you're like, yes, I can now see things more clearly rather than just through that angry lens, then you look at these new atheists, and just like how you were saying, that so many of these things are just a cover for their xenophobia. They're anti-feminist, so much of the time, while they went on and on about how they just wanted to help Muslim women, right? Or their critiques of Islam very quickly turn into great replacement theory, or general anti-migrant sentiment, calling them all kinds of horrible things. Like Sam Harris praised Conversations from Tommy Robinson, where he basically spouted white supremacist tropes so clearly, these Somali men are coming to rape our women. And Sam Harris was, not only praising that, but also promoting that and retweeting that back in the day. So, yeah, that's why the Islam stuff really scares me, because I could have kind of gotten taken into it, because being made to wear a burqa by religious morality police while I was growing up was not something I liked, and being told that women were second-class citizens was also not something I liked. So obviously when I moved out of Saudi, I had a lot of anger towards religion, and so that's how they get a lot of ex-Muslims on side, though. Right? I don't know how closely, or if you're familiar at all with new atheist dynamics.
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
But they love bomb a lot of the ex-Muslims. The more painful the story, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the more they will, enthusiastically embrace someone, give them a lot of attention, platforms. And some people, get really swayed by that, and then they start spouting more and more. They become the token immigrant, anti-immigrant. So as an example, Ayaan Hirsi Ali did a book I think it's called Prey, like Prey.
I think I've seen that one, yeah.
It's all about, like, literally her words are like black and brown men coming to Europe to, I don't know, rape women or something like that. So it's pretty blatant how they become. And
Yes,
like now there's like another theme of like the anti-hijab activists crossing over with like the TERFs.
Yes, yeah.
But that's enough from me. Let's hear more from you.
Sure.
What I did want to ask you about is like ripple effects from like American politics, Canadian politics. I know you guys had like a big anti-vax, anti-lockdown scene as well. Like we had that whole Canadian trucker thing.
Yeah, so that was quite influential on the so-called freedom movement here. When a few influencers in that space called for a convoy to Parliament, there was very little actual organising needing to be done because their audience had been watching what was happening in Ottawa, and similar thing was happening in Canberra, Australia, again influenced by Canada. And so as soon as there was this call out for a convoy to Parliament, people knew, like, oh yeah, we're doing what the Canadian truckers are doing, and they tried to frame it as a trucker convoy, but there were very few actual truckers here because it wasn't exactly the same issues. Because there's no border here that truckers can cross, being an island, so we didn't have the vaccine passed across the border thing. But certainly all the anti-vaxxers and assorted other conspiracy theorists started piling in their cars and driving from both ends of the country to the capital, which is roughly in the middle. And and the influence of Canada was pretty obvious because some people even brought along Canadian flags to like show their solidarity with the Canadian.
That's so wild.
Canadian truckers, and the Prime Minister at the time that said, it looks like a foreign protest because there were Canadian flags and there were Trump campaign flags, and there were New Zealand flags as well, but there was this sort of mix of flags from different countries where they were having protests or Trump campaign flags to sort of show this international solidarity of this movement.
Wow. And during the early years of the pandemic, so many people in Canada were admiring New Zealand and Australia handling it so well and keeping the rates really low and essentially having very little lockdown time because the rates were so low.
Yeah, we had a couple of quite strict lockdowns, but compared to what's had in some other countries, they were relatively short. And pretty soon we were back to we were one of the few countries having music festivals during the pandemic because we kept COVID out for. But yet there's a crowd here who will talk about the tyranny of the the last Prime Minister, because we had these short lockdowns and other restrictions there, and different groups would be conceptualizing this in different ways. I've got a chapter in the book on the Christian right, and there was a big pushback from kind of evangelical Protestants who believed that anything the government did which inhibited their ability to worship was an affront to God. So there was a significant evangelical wing of this movement who opposed lockdowns that stopped them going to church, or even gathering limits that restricted how many people could be in a church, or requiring a vaccine pass to go into a building like that. So there were all these different groups who, for various reasons, conceptualized our pandemic response as tyranny. And so there was that Christian side of it, and then there were the sort of anti-United Nations, anti-globalism conspiracy theorists who saw the World Health Organization as being this tyrannical globalist cartel or whatever. And they all then came together when we had this convoy to Parliament, and which turned into an occupation that lasted about 3 weeks. Yeah. Oh,
wow. Yeah, that's pretty significant for a country that didn't even lock down for as long as a lot of countries and had a fairly regular time in the early pandemic when so many other countries were suffering. So it's just bizarre to me that there would be so much pent-up anger about that, But I guess Canada did not set a good example. I do apologize. But I also saw, talking about the overlaps with American politics, that there's a uniquely New Zealand version of MAGA, which I guess some influencers printed hats and t-shirts of, called Make Our Dern Go Away.
Yeah, so they looked at the American campaign slogan and realised they could use the initials for a New Zealand slogan. And there was one influencer who printed these, had them printed by some outfit in China, these caps, like the Trump campaign caps but they said, MAGA, Make Our Dern Go Away, and he did bumper stickers and things. And and this guy, I'm not sure even how strongly he believes some of this stuff, or whether it's just a bit of a grift, but he's still going now. I mean, not with the hats, but with promoting a lot of anti-government stuff. So I guess perhaps he is a bit of a true believer. His latest thing, though, is he spends much of the year in Thailand and is only in New Zealand for the summer, and he's now trying to help people leave the West and immigrate to a place like Thailand, escape tyranny by going to a country with an absolute monarchy.
I mean, there's so much stuff that's so hypocritical and so ridiculous on the right that it's just it's hard to even take seriously because it's just so beyond ridiculous,
Yeah.
It's like they know they're being hypocrites and they don't care.
Yeah, surely they know this.
Yeah, and the anti-globalist, anti-UN, what did I see? Jordan Peterson very angry about Antifa not calling out the World Economic Forum. It's like, no, dude, like Antifa doesn't really care about them or
not
want
exactly
to
a
defend
fascist
them.
organisation. Whatever legitimate critiques that you can have.
No, but they're also not like Antifa's favorite organization that they're going to be defending them purposely and like not calling them, because he was like, oh yeah, well I noticed that you didn't call them out or something ridiculous like that. And it's like, yeah, Antifa, known for their love of the World Economic Forum. It's so funny because they are actually utilizing like this global sort of playbook themselves while they're screeching about globalism and the UN and anything that has world in the title.
Yeah, absolutely. I write a bit about the WEF conspiracy theories, and this was, you go back a couple of decades, and this was a target of sort of far left anti-globalization protesters, and this is an organization of, I hate using the word elite because it can be such a dog whistle, but it's the it is the leaders in like global business and so on, and there's been this weird pivot in recent years from the kind of left wing counter globalization sort of movement that existed in like the late 90s and 2000s to now the opposition to the WEF, coming from these right wing conspiracy theorists who think the WEF is going to lock us in our 15-minute cities and make us eat insect protein and all this ridiculous stuff like that. Yeah,
can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, where are they getting this from? Because, like, especially the insect thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a bizarre one because I think they've essentially extrapolated from there have been news articles and things about how insect proteins could be a food source in the future. I mean, they already are. There's a lot of countries where people do eat insect protein as part of their diet, but it's it's not common in the Western diet. And there are organisations and businesses who are saying, hey, this could be the next big food, and they're saying this is how we could feed the world with climate change and a growing population. And that's been extrapolated into the globalists are going to make you eat bugs, and they're going to they're going to ban. I mean, particularly here where New Zealand's economy is very agriculture driven and the farming sector is quite powerful, especially the dairy industry. So there's this real backlash against environmentalism that encourages things like, plant-based diets or alternative proteins. So you get this, the globalists they want to ban cows and they want to make us eat bugs or make us all go vegan or whatever, which, the minority, I guess, of the environmental movement may be advocating for everyone to go vegan. But really, the World Health Organization and the UN are not going to be banning cows anytime soon. And
But in no way either has this been like a very widespread sentiment. Like it's probably just been like a couple articles here and there, random ones. It's not like a big movement as far as I know.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the push for it that I've seen has come from these startups who want to create future proteins. It's these businesses rather than governments or supranational organisations that are advocating for this. I think the UNFAO, Food Agriculture Organisation, they probably have at various times advocated for having more plant-based foods or whatever, but they're certainly not out there with a plan to feed us all our insect protein paste or whatever. And the 15-minute cities is another one, which is, there was a Guardian headline which I think captured it quite well, like calling it the insidious socialist plot to allow you to walk to the shops. This kind of urbanist idea of like, let's have amenities close to where you live, and so that neighbourhoods will be walkable and we don't need to drive so much. This has been conceptualised as a kind of tyranny where the government's going to make you locked in to your 15-minute city, which is your neighbourhood. And I think because people were in these lockdowns during the pandemic and things, I've said that if you were able to time travel back to like 2018 and say to people, in a couple of years the government is going to force you to stay in your home and they're going to close shops and you won't be you would sound like a conspiracy theorist. So I think people became a bit more open to this conspiracy thinking during the pandemic, and now we've got people who seriously believe that the globalists are going to have like climate lockdowns. I mean, I'm really seeing a lot of pivoting from COVID conspiracies to climate change conspiracies with the same sort of talking points. And so, there are people who really believe this stuff. And I think if we hadn't had the experience of the pandemic with lockdowns and so forth, maybe people wouldn't be quite as susceptible to those kind of things. But they are. Yeah,
it's definitely opened more people up to that stuff, and that's terrifying. Yeah. The QAnon stuff seems to be out of control as well. There was someone in your book that I was reading about, I think Lane Davis. Am I getting the name right?
Yeah. I think so, yeah. The Gamergate sort of influencer, is that the one?
I think so, but like he stabbed his father to death, and because his dad and him were having an argument, and he had called him a racist and a Nazi or something.
Yeah, like Nazi. Yeah, his father called him a Nazi, and he called his parents like leftist pedophiles or something.
Yes.
That was a little bit of a late addition to the book, because I'd written about some of what Lane Davis had written about Gamergate and how he became a ghostwriter for Milo Yiannopoulos. And as the book was going through its first edit, the editor put a note in, I think you should put in here about how he killed his parents. I'm like, he killed his parents? And I looked it up. I'm like, oh my God, okay. Yes, this just gets much worse. And so I included it. But that's the trajectory this man went down from starting with like Gamergate to then believing that the feminists were influencing the UN to control our video games, to then...
Please subscribe to the premium tier or above over at patreon.com/nicemangoes to access full episodes of this miniseries. And do get in touch if you think you or someone you know would be a good guest for this series. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. No E in mangoes. There are still a lot of countries I'm looking to cover.